Hey investors. So as promised, I'm going to talk about some of the things that you want to have in your lease, okay? And just to give you an idea, this is a lease right here. Now this is for an apartment complex, but some of these same things you will find in other leases as it pertains to like more of a residential style, meaning someone is actually physically living there, right? And I'm going to do this in two parts because this has an actual table of contents and I don't want to overwhelm you and inundate you, but I'm going to talk about the first few things that are very important. Okay, so let's dive right in. So one of the first things you want to make sure that you have in your lease is the term and the renewal. Like how long is the term? Like how long are they going to be residing in your apartment or your single family home, right? In other words, do you even accept a shorter term? You know, some places don't accept shorter terms. They only accept either 12 or 13-month lease terms. So you kind of set the tone for that. I know a lot of places will say that their lease terms run anywhere from 2 months to 13 months. I've worked at a place that actually had that. You don't have to do that. Some people don't like doing short-term leases. Of course, short-term leases, especially anything less than 6 months, you're definitely going to pay more. You're going to charge more rather if you are accepting those types of terms. So you just want to make sure you're stipulating and spelling out what those terms are based on whatever their term is when they rent their apartment from you or lease an apartment or a home from you. Okay. You want to also talk about the renewal process. What does that look like? How does that look, right? Do you allow them to renew? Some places will send out a renewal notice within 75 days ish from when their lease is about to expire, just to kind of give them a heads up. Hey, you know, your lease is up for renewal. What would you like to do? Are you going to renew for another period? And if you are going to renew for another period, how long are you going to renew for? So you definitely want to make sure that you have that in your lease. And it's very, very, very important. The second thing you want to talk about, have in there is about the rent. Right? When is the rent due? You know, do you give a grace period? Do you not give a grace period? You want to stipulate that, you know, is the rent going to be due on the first of the month? Most places, obviously, the rent is due on the first of the month. But if you're offering a grace period, how long is that grace period? Most places will offer a 5-day grace period to getting that rent paid. So if your rent is due on the first of the month, you need to have that rent paid by the 6th of that month, okay, in order for them to not get a penalty. Okay, so that's very, very important. The next is going to be utilities. What utilities are your residents responsible for? What utilities are you not responsible for, right? Or you are going to be paying, right? That's very, very important as well, because at the end of the day, the reality is that your tenants are going to be using up the electric, the water, all of that good stuff. So are you going to be responsible for that, or are you going to put that on them? It's not unheard of or unusual for the resident to cover all the expenses. Now, if it's a single family home that you rent, you're obviously probably going to have your residents pay all of the utilities. If it is not a single family home, that might be a little different. But typically in a single family home, your resident is going to be covering all the expenses. In an apartment, that might be slightly different, where you may have, for example, the landlord will cover the electric and the gas, but the resident is responsible for the water. Okay. But you can stipulate that. I come from the school of thought that your residents should be responsible for all the utilities that are in that, you know, building, whether they're in an apartment or whether they're in a single family home. They should be responsible for that. Okay. All right, late fees and insufficient funds. You definitely want to spell out what those late fees are. Okay, I have seen where a late fee could just be as simple as a $50 late fee, but I have also seen where apartment owners will charge a late fee of 10% of your rent, whatever your rent is. So if your rent is $1,500, your late fee is $150. Yeah. So that's not unheard of. Again, you stipulate what you want that to be. Insufficient funds. That's also very important. What are your policies and procedures if you have a resident that tries to pay their rent with, say, a bank check through ECH, an electronic check through ACH, I apologize, and it bounces, right? Because the money isn't there. Well, what's going to happen is your resident is going to be charged a fee from their bank. You're going to be charged a fee because you have a check with non-sufficient funds. So are you going to charge them a fee also for that? I believe you should, Okay. So sometimes that fee could be something as like $25, but it really depends. Okay. Again, that depends, but you still want to stipulate that in your lease. Next up is additional rent. That would also go with your late charges, any pet fees, any other things that like fees like that they might be responsible for. Security deposit. What is your security deposit policies? Okay. Are you charging first and last months for security? Or are you only charging $500 and then charging another amount based off of credit worthiness? So you can do that also. I've seen where apartment owners will say, listen, your security deposit is going to be based off of your credit worthiness. You can set the tone for that, but you want to make sure you stipulate that about the security deposit. Depending on the state that you live in, you may be required to put that security deposit in an interest-bearing account. In the state of Pennsylvania, that is the case. Check with your state laws to see if that's something that you're required to do. And that's very, very important. Possession. What it is saying is that they'll make every good faith effort to make sure that that apartment is available to you on the date that you want it to be available. In other words, if your lease date is supposed to start on November 1st, the apartment owners or single family home owner may say, we're going to make every effort to make sure that that apartment or that home is available to you starting November 1st. But they also stipulate, and you should stipulate in your lease, that in the event of unforeseen issues, you want to make sure that that's stipulated that they may not have it available. Case in point, there might be some, and we did see this with the pandemic, supply and demand with a lot of your labor costs for materials. Maybe they're on back order, right? So you might not have been able to get your cabinets in time. Maybe they're special order cabinets. I don't know, because maybe your kitchen might be a little smaller, but it took some time for them to come in. And as a result, that pushed things back. That happens sometimes, right? Because maybe you needed to get it fixed from the previous resident. Okay. So you want to stipulate that on there. What the issue may be, that if that comes up, you still have the right to still possess that apartment or that unit or that home, and they may not be able to move in at the time that they stipulated that they wanted to move in. Use and occupancy. So this is a big one, right? And this is a tricky one because typically the way it goes, and to not go against fair housing, it's 2 heads to a bed, right? So you have to stipulate in your lease how that works. You definitely don't want to have a 1-bedroom and it's overcrowded with 5 or 6 occupants. That's not a good thing. That's not a good look at all, right? Because that could bring up a whole nother set of issues of its own. Case in point, I knew of somebody who was renting apartments because it was a restaurant owner. He owned a pizza shop. And what he was doing is he was taking immigrants and he was just like giving them these phony paychecks saying that they were making all this money at his restaurant. But what he was doing was getting them in these apartments, but he was putting like 5, 6, 7 people in a 1-bedroom apartment. That's not a good look. And depending on your township and your county, that could all spell trouble for you as the owner if you're not on top of that. Okay. Multiple residents. I think that's another big one, right? Joint and several liability, residence permitted, breach of lease, security deposits. We already talked about that. Here's a big one. No assignment or subletting. I know a lot of apartment owners will not allow subletting. Subletting in a nutshell is when you as the person, or resident, as a person is leasing the place, but then they decide to leave and go live somewhere else. And then they have somebody else move into that spot, and they kind of take up for their lease what they're, from what they were paying. And then that person has to give them a certain percentage of the money. A lot of places will not allow that. I've seen plenty of apartment owners that won't allow that. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't necessarily agree with that. But again, it is totally up to you. Whether or not you allow it, you still want to make sure that that's stipulated in your lease. Condition of the apartment is very important, right? You want to make sure that your apartment is being left in the same condition that they got it in. That's very, very important. But you want to make sure you stipulate that, okay? Do you offer furnished apartments? If you offer furnished apartments, that's something else you need to add on to that, to your lease. Because if you're offering furnished apartments, not only does that person need to make sure that that apartment is in good condition, but they need to make sure that that furniture is left in good condition as well. Your responsibility for damages. You want to stipulate what is the resident's responsibility for any damages. Prohibited conduct. You need to stipulate what is considered prohibited in your apartment building, right? Or in your single family home. What will you not tolerate in your place? Remember, and I said this in a previous video, you want to make sure that you're protecting your asset, okay, at all costs. And I'm not saying you shouldn't care about your resident. You need to protect them too. But you also want to make sure you're protecting yourself, which when I say yourself, I mean in your business, and you want to protect your asset as well. Any illegal activity, what do you deem, whatever is deemed illegal, you want to make sure that that is not, human trafficking is a big thing. And a lot of times these people have gotten savvy where they'll do human trafficking in apartment buildings, right? So you want to be up on top of these things. And it doesn't just have to happen in an apartment building. It could be in a single family home as well. So you just want to make sure that you are stipulating those illegal activities in your lease. Now, I know some of you might be looking at saying, Sasha, duh, that's common sense. Yeah, you're right. It is common sense. But we've also seen that common sense is not very common. And if there's a person who is looking to do something illegal, listen, they will try to get around every nook and cranny of your lease. They will try to find all kinds of loopholes to keep from being brought to justice for anything or being in trouble for anything. Any additional terms and leases, you want to stipulate that in there. Any additional terms and conditions, you want to make sure that's stipulated. No alterations or installation of equipment or fixtures. This is a big one. Do you allow those satellite dishes to be put on your building? Is that something that you allow? If you don't allow it, you need to make sure that's put on there, right? I personally think they're hideous because I found out that when somebody moves out and then a new person moves in, you would think they would still use that same satellite, but they don't. This is why you've seen in some houses where there's multiple satellite dishes on one house. So is that something that you would allow? If you do, that's okay. Again, you want to stipulate that on there. But if you don't, you also want to make sure that's on there too. All right, pets. This is a big one, okay? Pets is a big one, right? Do you even accept pets? If you don't accept pets, that should be pretty simple, cut and dry. You don't accept pets. But if you do accept pets, you want to make sure that you are definitely stipulating what is allowed and what's not allowed. Do you have a breed restriction? Do you have a weight limit, right? Some places will only allow a 35-pound dog. That's the max for a dog, right? So you need to make sure that you have these things stipulated in your lease, okay? And you also, and it goes back to the fees, any additional fees. What are those pet fees, okay? What happens if there's damage to the apartment or to the single family home if there's a pet and there's damage being done by that pet? So you want to stipulate all this information in there. That is actually considered a pet addendum. That's one of the addendums you could have listed in your lease, okay? And I'll go over in the other video some other addendums you could have in your lease as well. Access. Now, this is a big deal because by law, your landlord should be giving you at least 24-hour access to your apartment. Now, in the case of 24 to 48 hours at least, like if the apartment owner or the landlord knows that there's going to be some scheduled maintenance or some scheduled work that needs to be done to something in your apartment or your home, they need to give you at least 24 to 48 hours. And I think that's very fair. Now, if in the case of an emergency, that's different. Because some residents get so upset in the case of an emergency, like say a leak, because water has to go somewhere and that can create so many other issues, then they may need to access your apartment sooner than 24 hours, okay? But you want to stipulate all of this information in your lease because if you don't, again, somebody can find a loophole and you can get in trouble for that. So you want to make sure that you're stipulating all of that in your lease. All right. End of lease, right? You need to know at the end of someone's lease, what are they required to do? What is the procedure? Do you charge a fee if they leave behind, some of their belongings? A lot of places do charge a fee because you just can't go just dump that anywhere. And honestly, no landlord wants to be bothered with getting rid of a resident's stuff. So you want to put in stipulating your lease, what are the procedures at the end of someone's lease? Do they have keys they need to turn in? Some places use smart locks. So there are no keys, physical keys for an apartment or for a home. So if they do have keys, what does that look like? How does that get, returned to you? So that's very important. And you want to make sure that you are stipulating that in your lease, right? If there's any damages and things like that, that needs to be stipulated as far as at the end of the lease, what that entails. And last but not least, the breaking of your lease, okay? Do you offer what's called a buyout option? Some places do. What if you have a tenant or a resident that needs to relocate due to a job? And yes, they've been living with you for almost a year, but because of this job, they got to hurry up and pack up and move, right? Do you offer a buyout option for them? I think it's smart to do that. I think it's fair because, not unfortunate, some people do have to relocate because of work. So one place that I've noticed, they offer a buyout option where that resident has to give at least 30 days notice before they just up and leave. Now, they also have to pay what's called a preterm fee. That preterm fee typically is the cost of whatever their rent is, their monthly rent is. But once they give that 30 days notice, they pay that. They sign a preterm or an early termination agreement, which is very, very important for you to have that. And then they're able to break their lease without penalty. So if you do offer that, you want to spell that out in that lease. If you want to make sure you have that termination agreement. Okay. So I'm going to pause right there. Okay. And I'm going to do a second video on the rest of it because I think it's very, very important. I don't want to overwhelm you because it's a lot of information. But before I end this video, I just want to make sure you like and subscribe, hit that like and subscribe button. Be sure to drop any comments, any questions you have, definitely let me know. yoursassyrealtor@gmail.com. You could definitely send me an email if it's something that you want to reach out to me personally versus putting it in the comments below, okay? So I'm going to pause right there. I hope I didn't overwhelm you with so much, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. And in the next video, I'll talk about the rest of the things that you need to have in your lease as well, okay? Thank you so much for following. Thank you so much for subscribing. You guys have an amazing day. Bye-bye.